Jay, thank you so much for joining us too from San Francisco. And first, can you share with us your background and your expertise in EEG?
Sure. This is my 41st year practicing in the field of EEG. And I quit counting at 500,000 records back in the 90s. And EEG is pattern recognition, so the more you see, the better you're able to see it.
Right.
And there are really only a handful of people that have seen that many EEGs. Most neurologists will get, in a busy medical center, 2 or 3 in a day, maybe 5 in a day.
Right.
So 500,000, that's a lot of days.
Fantastic.
So we had a laboratory that did 100 each day, and the numbers stack up very fast. So I have a lot of experience looking at the wiggly lines of EEGs. Luckily, these techniques have developed during my career. So instead of just looking at the wiggly lines, we now use fancy computer algorithms to draw maps of where content comes from. Historically, if you would have asked me, well, what's the likelihood of seeing the impact of a sound in the brain? Well, yeah, you'll probably see an impact in the primary auditory cortex. You see a little ripple in the pond of throwing the little pebble of sound in. But boy, it's pretty hard to hypothesize that you're going to have systematic impacts in more areas than just the primary area. And most traditional analysis would have only found that.
Right.
However, we're using modern computer technology and advanced science here. We actually did a technique called independent component analysis. We break the brain's activity into its component parts.
Okay.
And different locations are responsible for different things, and you'll see when we actually look at these components that the impact of these sounds is in fact felt everywhere in the brain, not just in the primary auditory cortex. So seeing a distinct response with a very limited number of individuals. Most of the time in science, you need a lot of people in a study because you're looking at one group and another group, and you have to separate the two groups. And the experimental effect is how strong that separation is. And usually you need 150 people, 50 people in order to see an effect at all.
Right.
We did a pilot study with 3 people. So if you would have asked me, what's the high probability of seeing a powerful effect, I would have said, well, pretty slim. We're going to need to collect more data before we can see an effect. But we can see the effect clearly even in this pilot study.
Wonderful.
So the effect is a strong effect, not a weak effect, or we would not have been able to see it at all, other than with statistics.
Right.
And you'll be able to see with your eyes, with no statistician, that these effects are there in the brain.
Wonderful.
In fact, we have a series of them created as images,
Okay.
so that we can actually look at them.
Good. And just before we go there, Jay, you were sharing that you brought in a special analyst from St. Petersburg, Russia, who's like the best in the world, right?
Yes, yes. One of my partners is Dr. Yuri Kropotov.
Okay.
He was the head of neuroscience for the Soviet Union when it was an intact union.
Right.
Now he's the head of his laboratory in St. Petersburg because it's now just Russian. So he's famous in neuroscience in a major way internationally.
Good.
And the techniques that he's developed, the independent component analysis technique, in fact, is the only way we have seen these effects. Looking with traditional analysis techniques, you can see there's something there, but it's all fuzzed over by the noise of the system.
Okay.
We were able to break the components into individual little pieces. And let's say one component might only have 1% of the total energy of the brain going on in it. Well, what's the likelihood of seeing a small change within this 1% if you embed it in the 99%? Not very good. But we're able to look at it in isolation and see the differences between the sounds in each component in a very detailed way.
Wonderful. We look forward to the images that
Sure.
you'll be sharing with us.
The first image that we see is, in fact, one I would not have expected. The dot that you see in the front of the head here overlies the anterior cingulate. And the cingulate is buried between the two hemispheres here. The orange stripe down buried between the two hemispheres in the fissure is where we're really getting this activity from. So it's deep, and it's totally unrelated to sound. So my first impression was not a highly likely component to see any difference in. But so the cingulate literally showed the difference between each of the individual sounds, which we did not expect.
This is very important for me because I kept them all in darkness because I know a lot about the sounds, what A means or E means or U means, because everything is subjected, can be subjected to scientific research. Then only I can accept this, okay? Because I don't, there are these two experiments. Vocalization, you say, ah, and then you only hear. You think the sound, you hear the sound, you vocalize the sound, and then you can put the sound to a para stage, which is beyond thinking, beyond pre-thought levels. So when I was talking to him the other day, there is a significant difference between listening and vocalizing the sound. So all these are very useful for me to refine the techniques and then make it scientific, because I want to teach things very differently in a very concrete fashion so that it is a science, not philosophy. I have no doubt about it.